This is Void Bastards, a great name for a game. This is actually something that I was wanting to take a look at for a little while now, but only just now got the chance to do so, well, I'm late, but here we are. Void Bastards. This is a roguelite FPS with a very heavy comic book art style, to the point where even things like explosions and gunshots and the like actually produce like visible onomatopoeia words in the air, like a graphic novel or a comic book. All the cutscenes are done in a comic book panel style, and of course the overall art style of the game in general is very heavily stylized and shaded to look like a comic book, and it does a really good job actually of carrying that aesthetic along with it, including all of the very silly color schemes and things of the various ships that all match. It's got a very cohesive art style that a lot of work has obviously been put into creating, to the point where even some of your gadgets and things, they're all quite silly, you know, like robotic cat drones that explode and a stapler shotgun and stuff like that. It's all very like mega capitalist end stage space parody kind of thing. It's pretty neat actually. I really enjoy the style of this game as a whole because of that, the combination of like the art style and the general like aesthetic and the silly dialogue, and yeah, it's pretty great actually. It's got a ton of personality. So what is the game in general? Well, as I mentioned, it is a roguelite FPS, so that means there is permadeath, but it works a lot differently than your average roguelite does. In fact, this is one of the more forgiving ones that I've seen because of how your progress is kept in between runs. Normally, in a roguelite, you will play a character of your choice, and then as you go through the levels, you'll collect stuff, usually some sort of currency that you spend in between runs, some sort of like meta currency, like hegemony credits from Enter the Gungeon, for example, and then when you die, you will lose all of the progress that character had and all of their stuff, and then go back to some sort of hub area where you can spend this meta currency to upgrade your average, your whole sort of account, basically, in between runs, you know, unlocking new items and stuff to appear in all future runs. This game works very differently from that, actually. It's still got the whole permadeath aspect, so you do play a character, and the cool thing about the character generation in this is they're all randomly generated traits and stuff, so they can have positive and negative effects just randomly. So you may have one, for instance, that was a smoker, so they cough randomly as you're going through the levels, which will alert enemies near you. Obviously that is a negative trait. Or you may have one, for instance, that has sticky fingers, which means you don't even have to walk up to loose items in the world, and instead you can just sort of walk near them and your character will automatically pick them up, which saves a lot of looting time, especially when you're in the higher difficulty areas trying to go through certain areas quickly to not get killed. And people can have multiple traits, and in fact there are even random events and some areas in certain ships that you can get to that can actually randomize or remove or add traits for you. So the whole trait system is carried throughout the whole game as sort of like a reward / something that you work towards getting rid of if it's a negative one. So that's interesting. And you go across various ships. You have a very large, almost FTL-like sort of warp map, and you can choose from all sorts of different ships and different connections as you go through. As you go deeper into this nebula, things get much harder, but you can find more loot and higher quality materials and the like. And there are various types of ships that all have different characteristics. So you have like Lux ships, for instance, which are like big dining barges that have a lot of food in them. You have like refueling ships that'll give you a lot of extra fuel if you can find it when you're there. You've got prison ships that are called tombs, and tombs are like a very good source of different kinds of ammunition for all your various weapons. So depending on exactly what you want or what you need to get, you can find these various ships. And the ships also will have some sort of at least one item, different kinds of items and materials that you can find that help you craft new things, and this is where the big sort of meta progression comes in. All of these upgrades that you get and all these materials are actually persistent, so when you die, you do lose that character, of course, and any like ammunition and the like that they were carrying, but all of the materials that they had successfully gotten back to the ship, as well as all of the other items for crafting, and all of the crafted stuff that you've gotten so far, all stays. So that's what makes it kind of extra forgiving in terms of its roguelite nature, the fact that you have this very robust sort of multi-tiered crafting and material system, and you get to keep all of that in between runs. So that's actually really cool. As long as you make it back to the ship, then whatever your character had on them is stuff that is added to the inventory of the ship itself, and the ship is what stays in between your runs. So if you get a whole bunch of like plastics and biological materials and maybe like I don't know, some sort of like food tray, there are food trays you can get that are used in different things, all of that will stay even if that character dies, as long as they made it back, and the next character in line can then make use of that to craft new things. So the upgrades are a huge part of the game in terms of your overall progression, and there are a lot of them. This is mostly what you're going to be working towards. You do get there is a storyline, you know, it isn't just like random runs forever. There is an actual storyline that you're working towards, and every bit of the storyline is done in this really well-presented comic book style. They're all really funny, honestly. I would recommend just watching the cutscenes because the dialogue is great. It's got that, like, space capitalist parody thing, but it's done really well. And you will generally have some part of your sort of home-based ship that is malfunctioning and or missing and or has been stolen that you need to go and fix or create a new one of. So you'll have these various crafting materials that you have to go and find, and that the big star map will point you towards, you know, which ship is next in line that has that particular material that you need. But aside from all of that, you can also just gather and craft all these other materials to construct all these different upgrades. So that does create, like I mentioned, a very sort of robust upgrade system that is your main method of meta progression in between runs, and it also helps you get prepared for the later stages, because as you can probably see in the background right now, you end up facing some pretty crazy stuff. And the cool thing about the way the ships work is when you go to a new ship, it tells you before you actually board it what sorts of enemies you're going to find. It'll say, you know, there are a few of these, and a lot of these, and some of these. It doesn't give you exact numbers, of course, but it does tell you in general, like, what the sort of population will be when you actually get there. And if you do decide to actually dock on that ship because it has something that you need, or you want to explore it for materials or whatever, you can always choose a new loadout every time you go. So you have all your various upgrades that you've crafted so far, including like your weapons and gadgets and stuff, and you can decide, you know, what sort of main armament you want to bring, what sort of side gadget you want to bring, what kind of like extra utility item to bring, and it all is determined mostly by how you think you should best deal with the denizens of that ship. So if you come across a bunch of tourists, for instance, you may want the pistol to deal with them from afar, because they are not very strong. They die quite quickly, but they also explode when they die, so you want to be able to sort of pick them off with a plentiful ammo supply from afar. If you come across some of the more swarm-like enemies, maybe you'll want to bring a stapler with you, because the stapler is the shotgun, so you'll have to use less ammo in general to deal with swarms of enemies with a shotgun, obviously. If you come across these spooks, which can turn invisible and sort of ambush you in later rooms, maybe you want to prepare in advance by bringing your stun gun thingy, because you can shock them and stun them before they turn invisible and eliminate them immediately, so you don't have to worry about them. If it says there are going to be some screws on board, then maybe you want to bring the kitty bot, because the kitty bot is basically like a decoy bomb that takes the attention away from yourself for a little while until it gets depleted and then explodes. And the explosion doesn't deal that much damage to screws, but the thing is, nothing deals that much damage to screws, because they're sort of like the big juggernaut enemies that you want to avoid. You can kill them, but they are very resource intensive to kill, and it's generally speaking better to have something on you to distract them or stun them and then get around them, rather than actually trying to destroy them all, because it would just be too costly unless you had a ton of explosives or something that you wanted to use for that purpose. Ideally, you're better off just distracting them, stunning them, doing something to get rid of them temporarily and then leave. So that is one aspect that I definitely like a lot about the game, is just how much variety there is in all of the various gadgets and weaponry and all the equipment that you can actually take with you, because it allows for a really good feeling of pre-preparation. Like, you're trying to figure out what's best for what you're about to go into, and what you know about what you're about to go into, and how you think you should deal with it. It's a pretty cool feeling to have all these things available to you, and all these various upgrades that help to make them better in different ways, because it gives you a lot of individual stuff to work towards, and a lot of different sort of just play style defining ways to deal with certain things, and it definitely makes the exploration feel pretty fresh for a lot longer, because of just how many enemies there are and how differently you can deal with them. Like those shielded secretary enemies right there, they're called a Zek. They are very annoying because they have that front-facing shield and the sort of explosive projectiles they can cast at you, but the thing about their shield is, as I mentioned, it is indeed front-facing, so if you're able to get in behind them, you can destroy them pretty easily. So having things like the needle that poisons things from afar silently, or the shotgun so you can sneak up behind them, or even things like the grenades to just lob behind them while they're distracted by you so that the explosion hits them from behind and destroys them, things like that. You just have a lot of different possible ways, depending on all the various upgrades and equipments that you have, to deal with them, and it's cool to just see, okay, it's going to have some of those, so how do I want to do it, and have all these things available to you to try. There's also a bit of like an intriguing mechanic in the form of the merits, which at first I thought were going to be like a meta currency that you spend in between runs or something, but they're actually not. They're something that is lost on death, like your ammo and stuff, so you do need to actually use them. The merits are used to just do special functions of things. You know, maybe there'll be a locked locker that'll have some really good equipment or something in it, or like a high-class material. It might be locked, so you have to use merits to open it. Or perhaps you go to one of the medical bay ships that has the big like auto dock in it that heals you. You can spend some merits on that machine in order to temporarily like double your maximum health while you're on that ship, which is very useful sometimes. Oxygen supplies can be replenished with merits. Security systems can be permanently disabled on a ship with them. So they have all sorts of different uses, and you'll generally find find them in certain types of ships more than others, and there are also certain extra modifiers on some ships randomly that cause, for instance, enemies to drop merits just by killing them, which is a really nice one to have, and you can find them floating in space as well on the star map. So they are these sort of limited but very useful currency that you can find to engage in all sorts of like special functions for the various bits of machinery and stuff that you'll find along the way to enable some sort of extra bits of trickiness for you to use, which is pretty neat. I mean, roguelites in general definitely survive on their variety and the amount of stuff that you have to work towards, like upgrades or unlocks, or depending on the game, you know, what have you. And in general, the kind of enemy, weapon, equipment variety, all those things are very important because, of course, you're going to be... They can feel repetitive if it feels like there's not a lot of variety, so you're doing the same things over and over. But in this case, it really doesn't feel repetitive at all. The shooting is quite satisfying. It has a sort of a classic, like, almost build engine FPS vibe to it. All of the multi-tiered upgrades help as well. So, for instance, just unlocking a gun is not the end of that upgrade tree. The weapon will generally have some sort of ammo finding upgrade that allows you to find the ammo for it easier. It'll have various upgrades to the weapon itself to like increase its fire rate or its damage or some sort of special effect that it may have. You know, like the when you unlock the kitty decoy drone things that are sort of adorable, you can eventually get stuff like the unstable upgrade for them, which turns them red and causes them to be like cluster bombs when they explode. And there are also various like passive pieces of equipment, like different shields for different sorts of status effects, the ability to not slip on oil as much, extra health, all those sorts of things that have different tiers of upgrades that help to increase their effectiveness as well. So there's a lot to work towards here. The overall equipment variety is quite good, and the enemy variety is definitely a noticeable high point as well, with lots of different enemy types and also different variants of those enemies, with each with their own sort of different eccentricities, we'll say, in different ways that you may want to deal with them, and all their various behaviors, like the scribes, which tend to run away from you and alert other enemies, as well as having like a sort of a barrage of projectile attacks as they're running, to the security systems you have to deal with, to, as I mentioned, the very fearsome screws, and lots of other types of very silly-looking mutants with their own bits of personality. And I think that's really the main takeaway here, is personality. The game just has so much of it. It's so colorful, it's so well presented, it's got all this variety, and it's just such a personality-driven experience in terms of the whole theme being, you know, it oozes its own theme, this whole comic book thing, and like every aspect of it, and like I mentioned, the whole like space capitalist parody thing is just all present in every mechanic and every aspect of the game, from the way that you go between different ships, to the theming of the ships, to the announcements over the intercom, to your robot companion and all of your equipment and all the enemies. It's all a very unified theme, which is always cool to see, because when a game has this much personality, you want that theme to be carried throughout the whole thing, so nothing really feels out of place and it all feels very cohesive, and this definitely does do that. I've had a lot of fun with it so far, and I definitely plan on finishing the campaign, and if you'd like to check it out yourself, the link, as always, will be in the description below this video. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little look at this game, even though I'm a bit late on it, because I haven't had the chance to actually take a look at it like I wanted to originally, but hey, here it is now, and I'm glad I got to it, because it's a lot of fun, a very good FPS, and a pretty interesting iteration on the roguelite ideas, with this whole upgrade system being quite different from the way that they usually work. So yeah, I like it a lot. I'll see you guys next time.